Baizhu has always been a great character, but as his true potential has only been unlocked during Fontaine, he is definitely a unit released before his time. We're going to talk about his pros and cons in today's meta, and the surprising amount of teams that he is great in. We're also going to do a healer's tier list where we stack him up versus the rest of the healers in the game to help you decide if you should get him and how to make the most out of him if you do. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. I'm not going to do this super long usual breakdown of the kit because most of you are very familiar what Baizhu does. He heals, he gives a stackable shield, he heals, and he buffs Dendro reactions. Let's do his pros and cons first. Number one, Dendro is one of the best elements in the game for a healer to be. Just applying Dendro is already adding value to a team, and especially for reactions like quicken, spread, and aggravate, only the application of Dendro is important. The amount of application is not too big of a deal. He also provides full team healing, which means his synergy with Farina is really huge and gives him a massive edge over single target healers such as Yao Yao. He also gives some interruption resistance, which is unique among healers. Except for Diona, I think that's the only one. All healers do not provide any interruption resistance, and so although Baizhu's isn't infinite, it is a stacking shield that refreshes every 2.5 seconds, so you're always going to get a good amount of value, even if it doesn't prevent you from staggering to everything. Even having what he does is extremely useful and can often be enough. He's also very easy to build and can get going pretty well at lower investments, although especially when it comes to artifacts, and there's lots of different artifact sets he can use. And of course, he can also be an on-field driver, which is a surprisingly viable playstyle, especially if you want to do a Hyper Bloom or Burgeon team. He does have some cons, however. His high energy cost means that it can sometimes be difficult to maximize his healing or his buff, forcing you to run either energy weapon or an energy sands. He also does have a low Dendro application, especially from off-field, especially in AoE. And even when he's on-field, his Dendro application range is very short. You have to be right within boxing range of an enemy to actually apply Dendro. His buffing is relatively low, and as such, using something like Kirara with a Sapwood Blade can often provide a similar, if not larger, buff to your on-field character, although it is a passive buff, which makes it very easy to get value of as it's always going. And although he has a passive that increases his damage, his actual damage profile to the team is basically nothing. So he is not a perfect character. I do think Baizhu is for sure one of the best healers in the game. And if someone was looking for a healer for their account, it's hard to go wrong with Baizhu. So let's talk about all the teams that he works best on and how those teams have changed in the recent meta. The first team I want to talk about is most specifically for Pyro carries, although it is pretty good for other carries as well. But any Pyro character that can normal attack and vaporize this is just a really good core. Like Yoimiya, my Yoimiya was having a hard time clearing. Slapped her on this team, all of a sudden she's clearing no problem at all in the first set of this Abyss. Hu Tao is amazing on this team. You're often building Pyro characters with Elemental Mastery anyways, so when you do get Burgeons, they're doing lots of damage. Both Hu Tao and Yoimiya. Yoimiya less so, but Hu Tao, they proc occasional Burgeons. It obviously doesn't work with Arlecchino because she can't be healed. Technically, this would work, except that you are going to be getting Burgeons, which are going to kill your Arlecchino, and you have no healing except for your burst. So yeah, this is an absolute no-go. But yeah, Pyro carry, Klee, Hu Tao, Yoimiya, Diluc, Yanfei, all of those are really going to be good in this core. I wouldn't say this is like a top meta core or something like that, but it is very good and very strong and very comfy because of the Baizhu interruption resistance. I especially like it with Hu Tao. It is definitely one of my favorite Hu Tao teams, especially if you don't have Zhan Yun for plunge but you still want to use Farina. This is very comfy, and just having that little bit of interruption resistance is really nice. Sino Baizhu was a core that was, or was a pair that was touted and very highly talked about at the time, and in practice, after using it in a lot of different abysses since, I still like it, but I don't absolutely love it. The interruption resist is nice, but the fact that you have to build more energy compared to running Kuki in this slot, and you can do Nahida on prototype Amber, because you still have to run Nahida to get the Quicken Aura. Baizhu isn't enough, and you lose Electro Resonance. You do gain Dendro Resonance, and you do gain Baizhu's buff. So it is good, but in practice, you also lose the rotation damage when you're setting up. You're gonna get some Hyper Blooms while you're setting up with this team. So overall, I don't love Baizhu. I wouldn't make sure you get Baizhu for your Sino. If you're using Sino Aggravate, which is a good team. Not insane, but a pretty good team. Baiju's definitely preferred there because Kurara doesn't last long enough, Yayo doesn't last long enough. So you almost have to do Baizhu. So Baizhu aggravate with Sino, that's pretty good, but for the quick bloom and hyper bloom stuff, I still kind of recommend Kuki as the healer. I think in the I think what Sino really wants is like for a quick bloom anyways, is like an electro shielder or something like that. I don't know. We'll talk about that more another time. Novelette is obvious. It's probably Baiju's best team if we're looking at total ceiling. And it's definitely my go-to team for Novelette when I want to clear, and I want to for sure clear. Like Zhongli is obviously fantastic, but sometimes his shield breaks, and if you start taking damage on your Farina and Kazuha and you don't get as much overhealing from Farina and from like Novelette passing the overhealing to the rest of the team as you would like, sometimes later rotations you're not going to be maxing out Fanfare the same way, so, and your other characters are just getting weaker, and if you have enemies that do damage through shields, etc., like we've had the agents in the last couple of bests, then Baizhu can just be more consistent. You can also squeeze in a second skill, which is very important tech for Baizhu on teams that allow it. Not all these teams, most of these teams don't, but this team does allow you to squeeze in a second skill, which can reduce your energy requirements for Baizhu, which is really nice. It feels like he shouldn't be as good as he is on this team because, you know, Dendro isn't providing any reaction damage. So you'd think that you could just use, you know, Dea or Zhongli or something like that for those additional effects. But the consistency, the comfort, the healing, the interruption resistance, if you're C0 Novelette, is really good. And if you do happen to have C2 Baizhu for some reason, it becomes one of Novelette's very best teammates because you don't have to switch on to him at all. So it saves you valuable field time, and that's really good. Baizhu is an excellent driver. He's excellent as a Hyper Bloom driver. If you don't have Nahida, you don't want to get Nahida, or you want to use Nahida somewhere else, using Baizhu as a Hyper Bloom driver is really good. I've been liking this team with Farina, Yelan, Kuki. This is for, if the higher investment your Yelan, the better this team will be. If your Yelan isn't super crazy and is just more free to play, then using Xingqiu and using Raiden is going to be generally the best. Raiden skill buffing Yelan and Xingqiu's burst is pretty relevant here. Her range isn't as relevant. Obviously, Raiden has superior range to Kuki for Hyper Bloom, but Baizhu has to be very close to the enemies to drive properly. Just remember to keep that in mind as you're driving with Baizhu. You need to be right up next to the enemy, so that's very important. You can obviously run Burgeon as well. Your last slot is very flexible. I like Baizhu, Xingqiu, Toma. The last slot can be Yelan, it could be Nahida, it could be Kuki, it could be Albedo, or whatever it may be for the last slot. But this is your Burgeon core. I really like Burgeon with Baizhu. It's definitely my favorite way to play Burgeon, and yeah, both Hyper Bloom and Burgeon are really good. I also like Baizhu for Nilou, especially the first side of this current Abyss where you want to use Farina. Anytime you want to use Farina, because if you have a well-built Farina, you can brute force through like Dendro Spectre or Dendro Slimes if those ever appear in the Abyss. Or if you have, in this case, Coppelius' shield, you want to have Farina so that you can bop it, or you can use the sword, that special sword on Nilou. But having Farina that you can bop it and then Baizhu being your healer is really nice. You will still want to on-field Nahida and then switch into Baizhu to use his skill, so that's really good. Obviously, we already talked about Sino aggravate, but other aggravate with Yaimiko or Keqing. Baizhu is definitely the most comfy. Technically, the most damage is actually going to be Kurara, and you build her with Instructors and Sapwood Blade, but Baizhu is a lot more comfy because if your Kurara shield breaks, or if you forget to refresh it, then you're going to be out of luck. But Baizhu is very comfy. He will always be my choice, even though technically Kurara or Yao can be better or whatever. I'll generally just go for Baizhu because he's just more comfy to use. And you can also do Raiden Yai aggravate, but don't. It's cool. But you know, you can do it. So I think those are Baiju's teams. Let's go over his build guide quickly. You do eventually want to 90 him because you get more healing, especially now that we have Farina in the game. The more healing to max out Fanfare is ideal, and the enemies are getting more and more aggressive. The more healing, the better. I'm just a bit short on resources, so I haven't 90'd him yet, but you should. You want to level his burst first, then his skill. I'm at 8-8. I'll probably go 9-9 eventually, again, just for comfort and consistency. For weapons, the main choices is going to be Prototype Amber Obviously, his signature and Kokomi's weapon are fine, but Prototype Amber is basically just as good, so and it's free and craftable. Gives him everything he needs, HP and energy. Like, that's exactly what you want for your Baizhu weapon, so Prototype Amber is the way. You can do Favonius Codex if your team really needs energy, but I definitely prefer Prototype Amber if I can get away with it. You can do some interesting stuff on certain Electro teams with Hakushin Ring, also gives some energy. You can also use Thrilling Tales on certain teams, but yeah, it at least gives him HP. It can be hard to get the energy needs met, but it's still really, really strong if your team can use it. Most of the time your team doesn't want to use it. Maybe that Yoimiya team I mentioned, you could make that work, because Hu Tao probably doesn't like, Hu Tao would appreciate it, but it doesn't really care as much as, because she gives herself such an attack steroid. Obviously Novelette doesn't care. Like, a lot of the DPSs, you know, want something else. They want EM more. Like, Aggravate DPS doesn't really want Thrilling Tales all that much. It's not really worth the effort. Only one I can kind of think of is Yoimiya. That sounds kind of interesting. Maybe I'll try that sometime. A lot of people have asked about Sacrificial Jade on him because it gives HP and Elemental Mastery and stuff, and gives him more damage, and the answer is no. It gives the same amount of HP as Prototype Amber and doesn't give ER, and Baizhu does basically no damage, so you definitely don't want to use Sacrificial Jade. 99% of players should just be using Prototype Amber. In terms of artifacts, you have a lot of choices. If you're running him on a team that does Dendro damage, I mean, that's another team I didn't even talk about, is you can run him like with Alhaitham or something as like a second Dendro instead of Nahida. You want to be running him on the Deepwood set. And if he's driving, of course, the Deepwood set. If you're not running him on one of those teams, generally Deepwood isn't what you're going to be going for. In general, Ocean Hued Clam is sort of your just general best option, and it just works. But I don't know if I would really recommend farming it specifically. You can do Song of Days Past if you happen to have it. It works best in single target against single target enemies, as it only buffs 8 instances of damage. But if you happen to have this set because you farmed Navia's set, for example, you can absolutely use it on him. If you farmed the VV domain and you have Maiden's Beloved pieces, I don't think I have any, but you can use Maiden's Beloved on him. You can use 2-piece Maiden's Beloved, 2-piece Ocean Hued Clam just for extra healing bonus. Healing bonus is not bad. If you're playing with a DPS that uses attack, again, such as Yoimiya, Hu Tao, or someone who does attack damage, you can use Noblesse. You can use Instructors, but with Instructors, you're getting less HP because it's a 4-star set. So you're not going to be healing as consistently and therefore reducing his buff, which is based on his HP. So you can use Instructors. Sometimes it can be his best, but it's not very comfy, so I don't generally like to use it. And of course, you can use 2-piece Tenacity and 2-piece the other HP set to boost his HP, because again, his buff scales off of HP. So he's a character that will perform giving him whatever you have. Even I accidentally used him on the double Hydro Hyperbloom team with Farina Yalan, and I didn't put him on Deepwood, and it still got great clears to the point that I didn't notice until later that he wasn't on Deepwood. I generally just leave him on Ocean Hued Clam, but if you don't want to farm it, or if you're min-maxing for a different DPS, then you can use one of those other options. For artifact stats, you ideally would go HP in your sands, but it's pretty hard to get enough energy if you're only using 1 skill per rotation. If you're using 2, usually you can get enough energy recharge throughout your substats, because all he needs is HP and ER. He does require a lot of ER though, so I usually run energy recharge sands and Prototype Amber, and that's a comfy amount of ER for me. You want to use HP Goblet and ideally HP Circlet, but healing bonus is okay too. My healing bonus happens to have a lot of ER, and I don't want to farm for an HP Circlet. So if you're using Favonius Codex, you want to go HP Sands, and you'll often have to go crit rate Circlet because he doesn't have very many hits to score that crit. So you can waste a lot of time fishing for that crit if you happen to miss. For vertical investment, he's definitely a cons over weapon kind of character. His C1 gives him an extra charge of his skill, which basically just helps with his energy, which is nice. It gives him by being able to use 2 skills, you get a better buff. And then his C2 is the big one, where basically you can just use his kit. Look at when your own active character hits a nearby party member with their attacks, and he initiates his abilities. So essentially, you just don't need to on-field them at all after you have your C2, which is kind of crazy, to be honest. This makes him one of like high investment Novelette's best teammates. Definitely going to be good. It's going to be good in any team he plays on, unless the team has specific rotation gaps that they can fill. Most teams, this will just increase consistency, but it's definitely, these two are definitely not like priorities the way that DPS constellations are, like things like Farina C2, Yalan C2, Raiden C2, Novelette C1. Like, these are nowhere near the kind of increases you'll be getting from those. So you definitely don't want to start with vertical investment on Baizhu, but if you're already vertical invested into all your other characters, C2 C2 can be a nice quality of life, and beyond that, you know, you're just simping for Baizhu. C4 is like a small elemental mastery buff. It's nice, but like C4 is very expensive. And then C6 is basically now he does actual damage. It's still not crazy, but at least you're doing some more damage. And yeah, weapon is basically just for drip. It's almost never worth going for the weapon over anything else on your account. Like almost anything else you could do with your account to upgrade someone else's weapon or constellation is going to be better than getting his weapon. So I'm sorry for all of those who lost your 50-50 to his weapon. At least it looked. All right, so now that we've gone through Baizhu and where he's at, I want to compare him to all the other healers and just overall do a healer tier list roundup and talk about why that Baizhu is one of the best healers in the game, and talk about all of these characters sort of value, so you can decide, you know, do you need any more healers? Are the healers that you have already good? I've got Diona, Sayu, and Chi-Chi in the bottom here. All of them have some decent uses. None of them are really best in slot in any comps, but having them at the bottom is a little bit misleading because all of them are pretty decent in their own right. Like using Sayu as an on-field healer for Farina and Farina National, for example, I really like that. It's actually really good. It's just that Sayu doesn't bring all that much, but like you could easily, this is one of the problems with tier lists, especially nowadays, is that everything is so solid at a baseline, especially healers paired with Farina. But yeah, so Sayu and also Chi-Chi are actually pretty all right. And if you want to use these characters, you actually can use these characters and they're not so bad. And Diona has some pretty decent uses as well. I generally prefer Layla or Charlotte. If you need healing, I generally prefer Charlotte. If you need shielding, I prefer Layla. Diona basically, when that elemental mastery is useful, then Diona C6 can be pretty good. So that's why she's here. In tier 3, we've got Barbara, Noelle, and Mika. Mika is pretty decent these days. You could potentially argue that he could be a little bit higher because of the attack speed that he provides, maybe with Wanderer or something like that, with Wanderer Farina. I just personally overall would rather use Charlotte. Even for Eula, like Eula, yes, he is best in slot with Eula for sure, but even for Eula, Charlotte can still provide Thrilling Tales, so it's not like Charlotte is useless in the teams that Mika is good in. And really, he's only best in slot for physical. And yes, the attack speed is nice, but it's pretty niche. It's not that crazy strong. Once we get a really good physical character, or if we get another off-field physical sub DPS, something that brings up physical, then Mika will definitely shoot up in value. Noelle is a pretty good driver for Verena teams. You can use her to do damage with Goro, or you can kind of just use Archaic, Petra, and drive Yolan and Favonius and stuff like that. I don't really like that version, but building her as a DPS and healing up your team with Verena and stuff like that, and boosting her damage with Goro, and she's pretty good. She's pretty good. And Barbara is also a decent driver. I just made a Barbara guide. You can go check that out. Really good guide. I really like Barbara driving Farina, but she also has really solid uses in Nilu teams, and she has alright plunge multiplier, so you can use her in plunge. Overall, tier 3, these are pretty solid characters. Like, if they have niches that you want to fill, you can build these characters. Nothing wrong like that. I would say, though, that tier 2 is where we really look at some really good characters. Like, these characters are really good. And I know it's really weird to see Dory here, but Dory is extremely underrated in an on-field role. If you want to know why she's here, you can check out my Dory guide I made recently. I was shocked at how good Dory is, especially in sort of quick bloom teams with Farina. Very respectable damage. Very good team-wide healing. That's actually a solid character. Yao Yao, also a solid character. I made a Yao Yao guide. You can check that out. Charlotte, really underrated in my opinion. It's actually criminal how underrated. Sure, before C4, it's hard to use her, but once you get C4, you basically unlock the ability to use Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer on her, and that just gives her so much power in Mono Cryo. Like, these days, I prefer Mono Cryo to Freeze as a healer for Farina teams. There's other stuff you can do with Charlotte. You can check out my Charlotte guide, but also just like her healing is so cracked. Like, her healing is ridiculous. She fully heals your team, and it's incredible. Now, Cryo is in kind of a bad spot right now. I could see her getting higher, honestly, if we ever get a resurgence of Cryo meta, because honestly, healing that much and providing the Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer, you can also go freeze Ayaka if you don't have Shenhe Kokomi. You can do Farina Charlotte instead. It might be kind of hard to line up the Thrilling Tales to pass to your Ayaka, but overall, she's a really good character. You can use her with Wanderer as well for a nice freeze team, pass Thrilling Tales to him. I really like her with Novelette. Obviously, you won't use Thrilling Tales with him, but getting that big heals and the freeze is really nice. Jean, of course, being a really excellent pair with Farina and also providing VV. And if you have some constellations, can give some attack speed at C2. Really solid character. Everything in tier 2, these are really, really, really good. And then I have tier 1 and tier 0. I'll start with Bennett. I know that Bennett has fallen off for a lot of people lately, but I think until we get a character that buffs the way he does, he's still best in slot for basically every single attack scaling character most of the time. Yes, it's circle impact. Yes, you can get one shot. I think he's lower down in tier 0 than he used to be. I do agree that he's gotten worse than he was before, but combining the healing with the buffing that he provides is absolutely ridiculous. These tiers are not ordered, by the way, within the tiers, right? I don't think that Chi-Chi is better than Sayu is better than Daona, etc. These are all, I haven't pinpointed exactly what order these are going to be, but yeah. So Bennett, insane. Shen Yun, all the healers in tier 1 are also insane. They all do really, really useful stuff. Kokomi, on-field driver, for Farina teams that actually does some damage. Nilou Bloom, Freeze has fallen off, but Nilou Bloom's still very good. On-fielder in Farina is very good. Kokomi, very good character. Shinobu, insane character, provides healing and Hyper Bloom trigger, roll consolidated from off-field, insane. Not as good as synergy with Farina, but it doesn't matter because the fact that she roll consolidates those two are so insane. She still does work with Farina. There's other things you can do to make it better. Chevreuse is insane. At C6, I almost kind of want to put her here, but for now, I'm just going to leave her here, but you could, because pretty much no one has C6. It's not even really worth thinking about anyways, but just know that at C6, she really is beyond cracked, and at C0, she's still here. Just the team comps she opens up, the multi-wave ability she has, unbelievable. She still does stuff outside of Overloaded, or outside of Mono Overload as well. You can run a grouper, you lose the resistance shred, but you still keep the C6 and you still keep the damage, the attack buff. So still a really good character even outside of that specific niche, but mostly she's good inside that niche. She actually makes Raiden a good DPS. She was one of Arlecchino's, if not Arlecchino's best teammates at C6, and, you know, just enables an entire team comp. Shen Yun, also similar to Chevreuse, enables an entire team comp, makes anyone be able to plunge. Absolutely insane character. Best in slot with a lot of characters. C0, Zhao, C0 Hu Tao, best in slot. And then we've obviously talked about Baizhu. He goes in this tier for sure. He's one of the characters that brings a ton of value to your account. I would say that, you know, all these healers actually do different things. Like, Hoyoverse has done a good job not encroaching upon the healer space. Like Shen Yun, if you can't use the VV, or if you don't want to use the plunge, like, she's not that insane. Like Kokomi is Hydro. You don't always want your healer to be Hydro. Sometimes you do. Sometimes that's amazing. Sometimes, like in Nilou, sometimes it's not. Like with Farina, you kind of prefer she was a different element. You know, Baizhu is definitely one of the better ones with Farina. You know, I don't know. All of these characters are actually so different, and they just do different things. So moving into value and power, should you pull, like, value for Baizhu? Should you pull Baizhu? If you're lacking Farina teams and you need a good healer to enable those Farina teams, and especially if you've got like a pyro carry. Like, I think if you don't have, like, if you've got Novelette and you don't have Zhongli, could be worth it, and you have C0 Novelette and you want to keep him C0. Once he gets to C1, I don't know how much better he is than other team-wide, like Charlotte or something like that. It's tricky. I don't know if there's any teams that Baizhu is like a must pull, but once you get him, you kind of end up using him with a lot of different teams because he's very comfy. He's not technically best in slot for Nilou Blooms. He's not technically best in slot for Aggravate, although he sure feels like it. He's not technically best in slot for Novelette, but he feels like it. And he's not technically best in slot for Vape with like Hu Tao or something, but he feels like one of the better options for sure. I mean, Shen Yun feels better, but so overall, like, I don't think you need to go and pull Baizhu, but I think if those teams sound interesting, if you like the character, I think he'll be really, really good for many accounts. But if you already have, like, if you already always run Farina with Shen Yun, for example, and you don't play Dendro or you don't play Nilou, what are you going to do with Baizhu? If you already, you know what I mean? I would say there's also merit in comparing him to Zhongli. He's comfy in a different way. Like, he provides some interruption resistance, but he also provides that healing. So he's almost even more fail-proof than Zhongli. I really don't think there's like one blanket statement that you can give. You kind of just got to look at everything I've talked about and decide, does this resonate with me? Are these teams that I want to play? I think it's possible Baizhu is the difference between you not 36 starring and 36 starring, especially if you're running one of the teams they talked about and you find yourself dying or something, or you need an enabler for Farina. But I don't think he's a must pull. I think he's a great comfy option that you'll probably often use if you end up getting him. For future prospects, this might sound like a hot take since Baizhu has basically only received W's since he got introduced, but I think that there is a high probability that eventually a lot of healers will be power crept. I feel like Bennett provides so much value as a healer, and yes, he's not a team-wide healer, but he provides so much value as a healer that it feels like with more different types of characters like Shen Yun and Chevreuse, that although Baizhu is best in slot now, like his buffs aren't huge if they release, but Hoyo doesn't like to power creep, so they might be very afraid to power creep healers. Like there's not very many off-field team-wide healers. There's only Shen Yun, Baizhu, Charlotte, like there's not like, and Jean kind of, but there's not that many off-field team-wide healers that provide, you know, continuous healing and not just with their burst like Barbara. So maybe that's how Hoyo balances the healers, right? Is if you provide that off-field continuous healing, then they sort of limit you in the buffing that you can do. But yeah, I think if those I think very few people would regret getting Baizhu. You might, of course, if you don't use any of those teams, but I think for the most part, he's one of the characters that I ended up using much more than I thought, like way more. I thought personally that he was just going to be a Yao Yao side grade, a Kirara side grade, but in practice, he enables a lot more teams. He he feels way better to use, and generally I just end up using him a lot, despite me not even liking his design all that much.